let's see. First one's, let's see, creative leadership, and the other one is, I don't know what we're doing right now.
How long do they have to be?
Nope.
What do they do?
I'd like to not fail.
You didn't say that. Right.
I'm out.
You know, yeah, grade does matter.
Good evening. I'd like to bring the Lisbon Town Council workshop scheduled for Tuesday, February 24th, 2015 to order. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item, please.
Roll call. Councillor Bickford?
Yeah.
Councillor Lunt?
Here.
Councillor Brunel is not.
He will be excused this evening.
Okay. Councillor McTevier?
Here.
Councillor Crafts?
He is unexcused. I have not heard from him.
Okay. And Councillor Pesky?
Here.
And Councillor Garrison?
Present.
Okay.
And before we move into the next item, I just want to quickly do a housekeeping. I know that some of you might have some questions tonight regarding the reevaluation process. After we hear from our folks tonight, I will open it up for the public to come to the podium and ask any general questions you have of our state or Mr. Van Tynen doing our tax assessment, or our tax assessor, Ms. Malloy. So I just want the public to know that if you want to put your questions together, you will have an opportunity at the end. Next item, please.
Is a revaluation informational session.
Speaking tonight will be David Ledoux. He is the Director of the Property Tax Division of Maine Revenue Services. He has been with Maine Revenue for 36 years. He has been the Director of Property Tax for the past 10. I asked him here tonight because he can give us a general overview of property tax in general, and also explain to us the reval process, why we have to do it, and so on. And then Bill is here tonight to give us an update and kind of a timeline of what we can expect to happen over the next few months. And just for clarification, I'd like everyone to know that David is my husband.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. My name is David Ledoux, and I am the Director of the Property Tax Division. I've actually been with Maine Revenue since 1978, but I've been working in property tax since 1987. Started out in a position called Chief of Training and Certification, which essentially put me in charge of putting on educational programs for professional assessors, elected officials in the state dealing with property tax related issues. In order to be a full-time assessor in Maine, you have to be certified by our office. In order to be certified, you merely have to pass an exam to become a certified Maine assessor. Sounds easy, but our success rate has typically been about 25 to 35%. It's a very comprehensive exam, typically 7 to 8 hours. We have 5 parts that we test on, dealing with all aspects of property tax administration, from law, cost approach, income approach, comparative approach, property tax exemptions, duties and responsibilities of assessors. So right from the training and certification process is when we essentially teach the skills that are needed for people to be municipal assessors. And we do have a few certified people here tonight, which is always good to see. Each year we put on a 1-week school for assessors, a very comprehensive school. It's geared for anybody. I'd encourage you to come. We generally send out a mailing for the school, which will have as many as 15 different programs at any time during the week, dealing with a lot of different issues. And it's just a good way to get a good background in property tax administration. As a part of the training certification, we have 3 courses which we have put together to teach the various aspects. An introductory course, which essentially introduces an assessor or somebody who's looking to become an assessor to all facets of property tax administration, yearly responsibilities, again, some legal aspects, forms and applications that they'll need to know as the assessor. Our second course is the law course, which is one of my specialties. I haven't been there as long as I have, and fielded questions from municipal assessors, taxpayers, municipal officials for years. It's given me a very unique perspective in property tax law. So people sort of look at that as being my specialty. And of course, our third course has to do with the valuation process, primarily the cost approach to value, which is the approach which is pretty much used by every municipality in the state. It's a mass appraisal technique, which is utilized to establish equitable values. Now, equitable values is something that you probably heard before. I'm sure you hear again tonight. For your reading pleasure, we have a brochure that we brought on revaluations. It's a good handout. Feel free to reproduce this and hand it out to taxpayers, put it on the counters out in the hallway. And it's designed to sort of talk to some of the basics of what a revaluation is all about. Now, I'd just like to read the first couple of sentences out of this brochure dealing with a revaluation. A revaluation is a process that creates a solid base of inventory for tax purposes. Maine Constitution states, I'd say Maine Constitution requires that all taxes upon real and personal estate assessed by authority of the state shall be apportioned and assessed equally according to the just value thereof. To apportion the tax burden equally, an assessor must establish assessed values in accordance with just value. Just value is synonymous with fair market value. So the assessor's job each and every year is to establish equitable values on each and every property in town which is subject to taxation, real and personal. The reason for this is that when you go to commit your taxes, you essentially establish a tax rate which is applied to all property in town. So the same rate of tax is applied against all property. And because the Constitution requires that property be assessed equitably in accordance with market value, it's important to establish a fair and equitable value so that no taxpayer in town will pay any more or any less than their fair share of the cost of running municipal government, schools, county tax assessments each and every year. So the constitutional requirement is for the taxpayer's protection to make sure that nobody pays any more and any less than their fair share. Just value means fair market value, but the Constitution says that property taxes are to be assessed equitably in accordance with just value. It's not a requirement that each and every municipality be at 100% of fair market value. What is critical is that all property in the town be assessed at the same relative ratio to fair market value. I think the number you'll hear bantered about with respect to Lisbon is you have a certified ratio of 85%, which essentially means your assessments reflect generally 85% of fair market value. So that, say you were to have a new home or new business established in town, the assessor's job in the assessment of that property in the first year is to establish an equitable value. In this case, that equitable value would not be 100% of fair market value. It would be 85%. And again, it's the equity issues so that nobody pays any more or less than their fair share. Maine law does say that they want municipalities to assess property at least 70% of just value and no more than 110%. Interestingly, the only penalty in statute for a town to either exceed or not achieve the 110 to the 70% is if you fall below 70%, you lose some tree growth reimbursement. So funds from the state, whether it be revenue sharing, education subsidy, those are not in jeopardy here. That's not the reason why Lisbon has taken on a reval. The reason Lisbon has taken on a reval is that the town has recognized that there are inequities in town. And even though you have an assessor working full-time in the position, it's critical that periodically you reestablish that valuation base to, again, put everybody on a level playing field so that nobody pays any more or any less than their fair share. Revaluation is the best way to go, and you can do these things piecemeal, but it becomes very dangerous when you do that. I have to commend Lisbon for actually taking on the task of doing it all at once. It's not an easy process. There's a lot of work which is done by the contractor. There's a lot of work done by the assessor. And to some degree, some of your works are going to be coming up because a lot of the taxpayers in town are going to question as you come closer and closer to that deadline and when notices go out, why do we do this? My taxes are going up. You're going to hear that from a number of folks because anytime you reestablish that level playing field, you're bringing those properties that are currently assessed too little and not paying their fair share, you're going to bring those up. And some of the others that are paying too much at this point, you're going to bring them down. You'll hear from the people whose taxes are going to go up as a result of the reval. You will not hear from but a few of the folks whose taxes might go down as a result of the revaluation. And there's this sort of a rule of thumb in the business, and it really is a sort of ugly rule of thumb, and that is anytime you do a reval, approximately a third of the properties will go up in value, a third will stay the same, and a third will go down. That's not really the case, but it sort of illustrates the fact that it's a balancing act. And for all of that property value that comes up, you're essentially going to have on the other side values that either go down or at least with respect to 100% of fair market value, they all get equalized. And if your budget were to remain the same for this year as it has been for this past year, you're not going to raise any more or any less money as a result of the revaluation. The only difference is going to be who pays their fair share. So revaluations have nothing to do with the amount of revenue that comes in. That's purely a budgeting function. The assessor's job is to take what needs to be raised for the town each year, and again, it's the municipal expense, the school expense, and the county tax, and to establish a tax rate, to apply that tax rate to all taxpayers, and to assess that tax against all taxpayers so that that revenue comes in to fund the services of the town. A revaluation establishing that level playing field, in essence, secures the revenue to the town that you need to provide the services. Because the more you're out of balance, the more you're subject to people filing for abatement requests because they are overvalued, or pointing fingers to those people who they know who are undervalued. So it really is a fairness process. It's all about equity. Each reval company is in essence required to be registered with our office. Obviously, Mr. Van Tynen is. I've known Bill for a long time. And I respect a lot of the work that he has done through the years. I don't look at his work firsthand. Our people do. We have field folks that go out and review the results of the revaluations, and they put together reports such as this. We do this every year, but particularly in a reval year, it becomes critical to figure out, how it all came in the end. So I've known Bill for a long time. Very knowledgeable, and I got the impression from earlier today that a number of you are very familiar with him and his work. He was the assessor here for a number of years, and I'll just leave it at that. So another common question that comes up with respect to revaluations. This is going to cost us in some sort of state subsidy. Our state subsidy is going to get down for education. Our revenue sharing is going to get down. Our county taxes are going up. Actually, local assessments are independent of the value which is used in the formulas for education subsidy, revenue sharing, and county taxes. Municipalities, as I said earlier, they essentially are required to assess equitably and in accordance with just value, but not at 100% of fair market value. We have some towns that are as low as 50% of fair market value. Municipality not too far from here that I've often used as an example, Pownell is one of those towns that's essentially had values that have been significantly under 100%. They're going through a revaluation at this point to bring their values up. They're to be commended for doing the same thing. And again, it's all about equity. But getting back to the state subsidies, because municipalities have different levels of value compared to 100% fair market value, my office is given the task of determining the equalized value for each and every municipality in town, independent of, but with the local valuation as being our base. So we determine the equalized value which is used for education, subsidy, revenue sharing, and county tax. And what happens during the reval will not impact that number. So when you hear that we're going to lose state subsidies, that's just not the case. We do our job so that you're going to get your fair share, whether you're at 85% or 100% or 65%. Don't want to make this too long-winded an introduction. There's certainly going to be time for questions later. Again, this brochure, feel free to reproduce it. Our phone number in Augusta is 624-5600. If anyone has any questions, we field questions from taxpayers, municipal officials all the time. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Does the public have a copy of this tonight?
I brought about a dozen. I didn't know how many people were going to be here, but certainly Kathy has copies that she can reproduce.
Okay, thank you.
Put out front.
Does council have any questions for Mr. Ledoux before we move on? See none? Great, thank you. Mr. Van Tynen.
Good to see you all again.
Same to you.
I prepared a little bit of sample material just to kind of familiarize you with what's going on and what will continue to go on.
Thank you.
This
Still warm off the press.
It's fairly warm. So this is just to let you know a little bit about how the process works. And really the final part of the process is a notification to taxpayers. And I have a cover letter from a notice that we utilized in the town of Chesterville in a revaluation that was done last summer. And together with this cover letter, we provide, and I didn't reproduce one of these, a very simple computer-generated summary of one's account that gives the name, the address, the map and lot number, the land value, the building value, any exemptions, and the net value. And we generally provide an estimate of what the property tax would have been or is expected to be for the current year. Sometimes we go with what it would have been because we're trying to separate the impact of a budget increase in the amount of money that needs to be raised in taxes so that people are kind of comparing apples and apples, what their tax would have been in the previous year with the new valuation. And we hold hearings. They're informal hearings where people can come in and speak to me or one of my associates and review the information that we have collected on the property and the valuation that we have developed for the property, compare their valuation with similar properties, try to review the quality and completeness of the information we have on their house. And we agree on anything that we're going to follow up on. If someone has an old house and they believe there are some foundation problems that we didn't recognize, we'll agree to go out and take another look at the house and see if we think it should be reconciled with a different valuation. Or if they indicate that they don't have as much land as we thought they had, and they have a survey or they have a deed that indicates something else, we'll be happy to look at that kind of detail and try to reconcile our data to agree with the facts as best as we can determine. And then we'll get back to people. If they have come in and there's a question that needs to be looked at, and we go out and we look at it, we'll tell them that we have made an adjustment or that we didn't think an adjustment was necessary, but we'll try to get back to them so they know the result of our review. That's all informal. That's not a formal process. It's not like a hearing in front of a Board of Assessment Review or anything like that. I've got a list of frequently asked questions that I often put on the back side of the cover letter. And I included in this packet a few examples of how our valuation process generally works. All these printouts are actually from the town of China. And the first couple of pages that you have are really a summary of the listing card. It doesn't compute the valuation, but it includes the owner's address. It includes the valuation, some valuation history, and it has a sketch of the house, a photograph of the house, and our listing notes from when we measured and listed the house. Measuring and listing is the data collection. It's a very substantial part of the work related to a revaluation. Going out and collecting information, viewing the houses, listing details of the buildings for each property in the town. And that's summarized on a property record card like you have here. All this information is entered into a computer system. The particular software that the town has been using and that I very much prefer to use is called Trio, and it works well. It does a good job at what it's supposed to do. The computer doesn't value the property. It performs calculations according to schedules that the user of the system has developed, and they're all carefully reviewed. It's not just a mechanical punch it into the computer and everything's taken care of itself. The next page is what I call the valuation printout, and it does do the calculation. It lists much of the same information as on the property record card. On the second page, it has a photograph, and it has a sketch of the building, and it calculates the value of the building and the land. On this first property record card, it's a simple one-story ranch house, and it's called a grade C, which in our system and in probably the majority of appraisal systems for mass appraisal, that's an average quality house. Nothing extraordinary, nothing substandard, but a relatively average quality house. Pretty much built from standard plans with average materials, average workmanship. And this particular house was built in 2002. You can see that at almost to the bottom of the page. And it was regarded as an average condition house. And with the system that we use in place, the age and the condition work in tandem. A 2002 house is going to probably be in substantially better condition than a 1900 house. But it really means average condition for a house built in 2002. If it's an exceptionally maintained house, we might call it better than average condition. If it has some deferred maintenance, we'll call it less than average condition, and maybe even as low as poor condition. But this is the software that we use, and we try to take into consideration, using this software, almost all the same characteristics that anyone looking at a house to buy or to sell would be looking at. The size of the house, the story height of the house, certain building components, the foundation type, the extent of the basement, the type of siding, the number of bathrooms, the overall quality of the house, the condition of the house, the type of heating system. We generally look at the same kinds of things that I think most professionals looking at real estate to buy or sell, or owners looking to buy or sell, would be looking at. We also look at the neighborhood. I mean, some neighborhoods may be a little bit upscale than the average neighborhood. Some neighborhoods may be a little less desirable than an average neighborhood. Some neighborhoods may be encumbered with a lot of traffic that isn't sought after for a residential location, or they may be predominantly in a floodplain where that's a bit of a concern. So we also look at the neighborhood that the property is in, and we may have a little higher land value in some neighborhoods and a little lower land value in some neighborhoods. And in some cases, we may make a building adjustment in a particular neighborhood. Some neighborhoods may be so close to well, a floodplain neighborhood. If there's a neighborhood that's predominantly in a floodplain, that may not just show as a lower land value, but it may make homes or other buildings a bit less desirable than an area outside of the floodplain. So you might give a little bit, or depending on the sales that can be observed, a substantial amount of obsolescence of the building for its location in the floodplain. So we'll try to take those kinds of things into consideration. I have a few other printouts. I don't know that it's worthwhile to go through each one, but it shows you in a little bit of detail of how our valuation system will work. A big part of a revaluation is an analysis of all the sales that have occurred in a community. And sales are also the raw material, the data to draw conclusions on in a fee appraisal that you might have of your house or of another property. People are going to look very carefully at what properties have sold for. In the case of a revaluation, and in the case of ongoing tax assessment work, you look at things on a mass appraisal basis. And what that means for sales analysis is that you record all the sales data available in the town, neighborhood by neighborhood. and you develop and fine-tune appraisal schedules that fit the sales activity as closely as you can make it fit. There's never perfection. The market for property is not perfectly interpretable, but you try to get as close a fit as you can, and you use a statistical methodology to do that analysis. That's called sales ratio analysis, where you compare your appraised value to the sales price in a big statistical study, or sometimes a smaller statistical study. And you try to have a realistic average ratio of your assessed valuation to sales prices. And I usually try to have something in the neighborhood of 95 to 97%. I don't want to be above the market. I'd rather be a little bit below the market or right on the market rather than have a perfect balanced system, but it'd be a little higher than what things are really selling for. And you don't just look at the ratio, but you look at what's called the quality rating or coefficient of dispersion. And with a coefficient of dispersion, the lower the coefficient of dispersion, the tighter the fit is of the assessed values to the sales prices, at least on the average. The state law sets a standard of you should be less than a measure of 20. To give you an idea of how that works, let's say in a particular neighborhood in town, you had 3 sales. And one sale was at 50% of its, the assessed value was at 50% of its sales price. Another one was at 100% of its sales price. And another one was 150% of its sales price. That's a perfect ratio of 100%. But there's an awful lot of dispersion around the average ratio of 100%. And in a case like that, the coefficient of dispersion would be, I think, at least 30 or a little higher than 30. And so you look at both of those measures. It's not just enough to look at the average ratio. If you had 3 sales in an analysis, and one was at 90% of its sales price, one at 100%, and one at 110%, it all makes sense that that's a much tighter study than the one that I described earlier. And in that case, the coefficient of dispersion would be right around 7. It would be a very low number indicating a pretty tight fit of the individual sales ratios of those 3 sales being right around the average. In that example I gave you, it's obvious that one is much better than the other, but the statistical measure to kind of put a label on that better fit is the coefficient of dispersion. So we will be doing, and we have been doing, that kind of analysis for properties in town as a whole and subsets of properties, what's called stratified sales ratio analysis, where maybe you're going to do one style of home. Look at how your schedules fit with 1-story homes, with 2-story homes, with 1.5-story homes, to try to not just see how you're doing overall, but how you're doing with subsets. Ideally, you want to be pretty close with all those different categories of property. You might do a sales ratio study by zoning, one zone, a rural zone, a suburban zone, or by sizable neighborhoods, where you could just check that you're being consistent on all different types of property. So that's, those are two big steps of a revaluation. All the information has to be entered into a computer, and that's a big step of work as well. When we're finished with everything, everything goes on your computer. You have it. You work with it if you want to work with it in the future, which I assume you would, where you can update properties in the future individually or in categories to fit a changing market if there's a changing market, and roll it into your tax billing system and be ready to commit taxes. So it's the data that I'm developing and reviewing and fine-tuning all belongs to you in the end and gets installed on your computer system. Where we are right now is we have I think gone around and measured and listed about 93% of the town structures. And that's generally about 54% of the work of the revaluation, that physical work of going around and collecting data on all those structures. Another part of our work is callbacks. That's a part of the work that we're spending some time on now because it's, I don't know whether you noticed it, but it's pretty hard to get around a building right now. So we're revisiting some of the buildings where we have collected data and trying to get an interior inspection if we weren't able to get an interior inspection earlier in the process. And we're leaving a callback form that invites the taxpayer to give us a call to arrange an appointment to do an interior inspection. One of the things that's made clear on this handout that Dave Ledoux provided to you is that the taxpayer does not have to let us into their home. I mean, we will do the best that we can with an interior inspection or an exterior inspection, or even just a view from the road, if that's all the taxpayer wants us to have. They have the right not to have their house inspected. There's no requirement that they have to allow us to have access to the interior of their home. But we try to do as much of that as we can. Data entry is a big part of the job. I think it's generally about 24 or 25% of the revaluation job. And our data entry is almost current with our data gathering, our measuring and listing. We're just a little bit behind what's been measured and listed in terms of putting it into the computer. On the sales analysis, I think we're about 70% done, 65 or 70%. On review, just trying to check that our work is accurate and that there's an equitable relationship from one property to the next, that they're rated for story height, rated for condition in a consistent manner. I think we're about 50%. Personal property, we still have a lot of work to do. And we will be sending all businesses in town a request for what's called the true and perfect list. People will also, and we may have talked about this as a group earlier, and today they'll be submitting a Betty list, a list of property that meets the requirements, personal property, machinery and equipment, that meets the requirements to be exempt from taxation. all of that data, except for some rather extraordinary accounts that are very large and cumbersome or very specialized, will be done within the TRIO system as well. There's some specialized properties that just don't fit into TRIO. You've got, for example, a natural gas pipeline. You have a gas utility company. You have an electric utility company. You have a hydroelectric plant. Those are more specialized properties. They're not routine properties. On those, I will use another format to develop the value. Oftentimes, it will be based on an Excel spreadsheet, and the bottom line will be entered into TRIO, but it's not going to be an easily automated mass appraisal approach in TRIO. On all of those, whatever I develop will also belong to the town, and I will provide the files to the assessor's office. As soon as the snow gets down a little bit, we will finish the field work, and we'll finish the sales analysis and the review and the data entry. And we will try to be ready to hold, to do notices. Hopefully in the neighborhood of May. And I still have a considerable amount. I mean, I've got major parts of the job done, but I've got to pull it all together. So I will try to get things so we can start holding hearings in May. And I will shoot to finish before the end of your fiscal year. It's possible that the hearings may extend a little beyond that, but it certainly will be all ready for you for your tax commitment for the 2015-16 year. So I've gone on for quite a while, but that's basically where I think we are, and that's some information on the process. Just to review for everybody, people in the audience and people that are on the council, a revaluation does not change the normal appeal process. The process that we have of informal hearings is something that normally, I mean, anybody can come in and talk to the assessor anytime, but this is a notification and hearing process that's really an extra step in the assessment process in a revaluation. After the tax is committed, a taxpayer has the same avenues that they would have in any other tax year. And those avenues are to, the first step is to request an abatement from the local assessor. The local assessor, in all likelihood, will look at the property, review the information that was submitted, and make a decision to grant or deny an abatement. And any communication to only partially grant an abatement or to not grant an abatement has to have the appeal process explained in the letter. And the appeal process in your town is to appeal to the local Board of Assessment Review, which is, I believe, a 5-member board that would meet, hear information from the assessor or agent for the assessor and from the taxpayer, and take testimony and then meet and discuss both sides of the issue and deliberate and make a decision. Normally, the next step, if a taxpayer disagrees, is to go to Superior Court. In the case of certain properties, of a commercial or industrial nature with a value in excess of $1 million, they can appeal to a state board of property tax review after exhausting the local options of the assessor and the local board of assessment review. One thing I want to point out that David maybe didn't mention or didn't mention enough. The general rule, the standard rule, is that property is always supposed to be assessed equally according to just value. However, over the years, there were some constitutional amendments that were made that allow an exception for a few classes of property to that standard constitutional rule. And those are, at least pertaining to this town, tree growth. Certain owners, if they have more than 10 acres of land that's forested and they meet the requirements to enroll it in tree growth, which include having a forest management plan and following it, can be taxed at state calculated tree growth values each year. There's a farm and open space tax law, but there's the farm and the open space are different programs, even though they are described in the same statute. A farmer who has, I believe it's over 5 acres of land in production, can apply for and be taxed not on a house lot where there is a house, but on open land, field, cropland, horticultural land that grows maybe shrubs and things like that to sell later on, and their forest land at a farm land value that may be lower in many cases than market value. And an owner who applies for and qualifies for open space taxation can be taxed at less than just value for open space land. And most assessors use a statutory adjustment, which is they meet the requirements for open space, but that's all. It's valued according to the regular land schedule. I believe it's less 20%. If it's available for public use, for hunting or for hiking trails or that type of thing, maybe it has a snowmobile trail across it, it's eligible for an additional reduction in value, which I think is right around 30%. And if it's protected from development or protected from development and forever wild, can't be developed at all, has to be just kept in its pristine state, there's an even greater reduction in value. So there's those 3 exceptions to the general rule. There's also a working waterfront current use program that would only be relevant in a coastal town. And I'm happy to try to answer any questions from anybody.
Thank you. Does council have any questions or comments for Mr. Van Tynen? The only question that I had was the schedule, how you felt, if we were going to be on time for the next tax commitment, and you feel confident we'll be able to get that done.
Very confident. I don't see a problem. I may not have all the hearings concluded by the end of June, but I certainly will have it all concluded by the time you're ready to commit taxes.
Great. And my other question I had just sprung. Are you seeing anything, out of the ordinary through the process so far that is alarming to you or a red flag?
No, I'm not seeing anything at this point in time that is alarming to me. One thing that I just learned about today, and I intended to bring it up to officials in town just as a consideration, and that's, I know you're considering or pursuing a downtown TIF, and the highest value property that you have in town is in your downtown TIF, as I understand it's currently proposed, and that's the Warumbo hydroelectric plant. And over the last 10 or so years, there's been some instability in the valuation of that kind of property. The highest sale of an individual hydro that I ever observed, it's actually two hydros right near each other, and they share some infrastructure, occurred in about 2006, $144 million sale of two hydros under one license in the town of Rumford. At that point in time, wholesale electric prices were in the neighborhood of 8 or 8.5 cents. A few years later, wholesale electric prices were in the neighborhood of 3 or 4 cents per kilowatt hour. And the value of that hydroelectric plant no longer could be justified at $144 million. The values clearly went down because energy prices went down. In the last few years, energy prices on a wholesale level have gone up. And almost everybody who looks into the situation says they have gone up because we've had cold winters, and the primary fuel for the generation of electricity in New England, and New England has a regional energy market, is natural gas. And although there seems to be an abundance of natural gas in the country, there's a shortage of pipeline capacity to bring natural gas into New England. So during cold weather, with demands for natural gas for home heating and building heating, and for demand for generating electricity, the prices have gone sky high to historic levels, at least during certain cold weather snaps. And that, when you look at a whole year's data, that means the price of electricity substantially is pretty high. So I want you to be aware of that. I want you to, it's not anything that I find alarming, but it's something that struck me as maybe something you want to think carefully about, because if that goes way up in value, because the market for electricity is very high, you may be having a situation where you're dedicating that revenue from that increase in value to projects that don't help you control the tax rate. On the other hand, if the value goes down, it could go down so much that it's going to erase your TIF. Money that you were planning from your TIF to do certain projects, if that goes down by $5 million, your TIF may disappear. So that's not an alarming thing from the revaluation point of view, but it's something that, since you asked that a general question, I thought I would point that out to you.
No, I'm really glad that you shared that information because I was not familiar with that approach that you shared tonight. So it'd be definitely some consideration that I'm going to put into that before the TIF comes back to us. Council have any other questions or comments? Mr. Van Tynen? Great. I really appreciate you coming in tonight. And Kathy, do you have anything you wanted to add? Diane, you all set?
Oh, I'm all good.
This time I would invite anyone from the public to come up and ask any questions you do have of Mr. Ledoux or Mr. Van Tynen. I do ask that you come to the podium so the folks will be watching on TV will be able to hear your questions and not just the response from whoever gives a response. Anybody?
Don Fellows from the Lisbon side. Just one comment and then one question on the TIF. We were sitting back there thinking, we're not sure. We don't think that the hydro is in the TIF, but that the mill building was. We're not sure of that, and by tomorrow night or Thursday night, we'll know for sure. And discuss it. We have a master plan meeting that night, so we'll talk about it. The question I had is, we've talked about evaluation, and we've talked about it'll be complete, and it'll be done, and everything will be up to date. But the process leading up to this was, we haven't had a reevaluation in 20 years, and there's so much inequality in the town that we need to have one. What is, and I ask either one of these gentlemen, what is the normal process to assure that we don't have to do this again on a mass scale? Is there a process that you can follow, either by contract or by staff, that would keep it up to date in segments or phases or whatever going forward?
Thank you.
The first thing I'd like to point out is that, at least from a data management recalculation of value point of view, you're going to have much more power to make changes either across the board or on certain segments of property. If the market indicates that there's a need to make changes. So you'd be able to raise land values across the board. You'd be able to raise land values in certain neighborhoods or differentially in different neighborhoods. You'd be able to upgrade your building cost schedules, change your depreciation schedules, all that kind of statistical or appraisal manual type changes, which is something you couldn't do in the past because you were with a manual system. So for example, I did a revaluation in the town of China in 2007, and in 2013, I think it was 2013, our reports from Maine Revenue Services indicated that we had a ratio right around 110%. And as I said before, I don't like to overshoot. We were within the law. We could have certified 110%. But I made some changes to our appraisal system. And they were a little bit differential. They weren't across the board. But I reduced valuations. I think the changes that I made for buildings were across the board. I decreased the cost schedule, and I redepreciated buildings based on a few more years of age since the last time they were recalculated. But the land values were reduced more on non-waterfront property than they were on waterfront property. So there's a little bit of a shift to the waterfront, although every value went down. So you have the ability to do something like that. Another town that I work in is the town of Bethel, and I did a revaluation in Bethel in 2008 or 2007, somewhere in that time frame. And Bethel has a real strong second home market. And there's a substantial amount of fairly newer homes, chalet style, mountain views, and almost all of them have log siding. It's just, that's a very popular home style for second homes in Bethel. So I, over the years, have had to make some changes in Bethel. Some downward adjustments in land. I've redepreciated buildings a few times to get the building value down at least just a little bit. And I believe it was 2 years ago, I had to implement a change on the style of second home that I just described. I mean, these are year-round houses. The second home market in Bethel is primarily a ski market. They all have a heating system, well insulated, well built. And I just updated that particular portion of the real estate tax base within the town of Bethel. So your town will be in a far superior position than you were in the past to make those kinds of changes using the power of a computer and the brain power to help control that computer and do what you need to have done. I think you always have to be careful. I mean, I've heard councils or boards of selectmen say to me, well, let's go out and do a quarter of the town each year and update that quarter of the town. And that's exactly what David has told us we shouldn't be doing. I mean, it's one thing if you update the style of house that I mentioned in Bethel that clearly was undervalued compared to other types of houses in Bethel. There you're just bringing that up to the same level of assessment ratio as the rest of the town. But you don't want to revaluation, or you don't want to update one part of the town geographically if it's just typical of the town as a whole and have 1/4 of the town valued out of line with the other 3/4 of the town. You want to avoid that. But you certainly can try to maintain your database with some re-inspections and, you know, try to re-inspect a certain percentage of the homes or buildings each year. But I guess I have a cautionary word too. What happens to, I think, anybody that does tax assessment work is many things happen incrementally, gradually, over time. Somebody had a house that was, when it was last looked at, in maybe a little below average condition. And one year they put a new roof on it. 5 years later, they replaced the windows and they put new siding on it. Unbeknownst to anybody, they did an awful lot of interior decorating, floor coverings, and they made what was a below average house an above average, not quality, but condition house. And most of those little individual things that I mentioned are below the threshold that's going to capture the attention of the assessor and result in a valuation change. I mean, if somebody replaces a roof and you called the house terrible condition because it had leaks coming all through the roof, they put a new roof on you, that's going to capture attention. You probably are going to notice that, and you're going to change the valuation of that house, especially if it required a building permit so you knew what was going on. But not for a more typical house. You're not going to change the value because it was time to put a new roof on. It was age 23, and they had a 25-year roof, and they changed it. So I think periodically, even if you can make some changes piecemeal, you're not going to capture that kind of cumulative change, or sometimes maybe transformation that might occur incrementally over many years without a pretty thorough reinspection program.
So in summary, you think it's easier because we now have now have a digital system for the assessor to keep the cards up to date and to make those adjustments or things as needed. One of the questions that popped in my mind was, would the town need, from your professional standpoint, would we have to go through another full reevaluation process in 20 years, or should we do something that we need to do more often than 20 or 25 years?
It's a hard question. I've worked in the town of Skowhegan for a long time, since 1990, and I met that woman over there in Skowhegan, and they had a revaluation done in 1991, and the software that Skowhegan has is not Trio, and I'm not as adept at working with that software as I am with Trio. But I've kept the ratio at a very substantial ratio. It's 94 or 95%. Has a pretty good coefficient of dispersion. It might be in the neighborhood of 14 or 15. But I know a revaluation's needed. I mean, I've gone 24 years without a revaluation. I've done some statistical updates. The ratios are still very good. The coefficient of dispersion is very good. But some houses have gone downhill. Some neighborhoods have improved. Some houses have had a lot of interior work on that doesn't require a building permit. It's only very recently that Skowhegan required a building permit. So I think the town would benefit and improve its assessment system by a revaluation. But the statistical measures really don't make you jump to that conclusion. But it's time. I mean, Skowhegan, with 24 years or so since the last revaluation, those kinds of changes that I was describing, they've been cumulatively happening over many years, and I think the only way to really improve it is to reinspect. I think that's a hard sell. I mean, the council or the board is going to look at it and say, you're doing such a good job, we don't have to do it. But it really, at that point in time, you can't keep the same system going. You can't keep a car running forever either. You gotta recognize when it's time to trade it in.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience at this time? Ms. Fitzgerald?
Dorothy Fitzgerald, Lisbon Falls. I'm not sure who this should be addressed to, probably Mr. Van Tynen. The town of Lisbon has just designated our downtown Lisbon Falls area an area of slum and blight. So should those properties be reevaluated, a new evaluation, and how would that affect the town as a whole? Question number one.
Okay, go ahead with number two.
There have been a lot of, because the economy has not been great not just here, but everywhere, in Maine especially, this area of Maine. There are a lot of foreclosures, a lot of short sales, a lot of bank-owned properties, and the town is in the process, has a list of 20 or more properties that may be undergoing foreclosure. How does that affect our evaluation as well? Thank you.
Thank you.
Personally, I don't care for the system of grantsmanship or whatever it might have been that might have caused or helped cause an area of town to be called an area of slum and blight. I think it's an unfortunate term. And I generally would have preferred if that hadn't been done. I think sometimes there's something to a label theory. If you call something something, or if you call a child something, they may start to act the way you label them. I will look carefully at the sales in all of Lisbon, including any sales that are in that area that has been called an area of slum and blight. And I'll try to be as accurate as I can based on the sales. But I have a concern that that term was used. And in my own personal opinion, this isn't the only place that I've ever encountered this same situation. I mean, the town of Fairfield, where I've done a lot of work over the years, designated an area near its downtown as slum and blight to qualify for some potential funding opportunities that are only available for an area that's called slum and blight. But I would have a hard time, in my own personal opinion, based on what I really would classify in my own system of what constitutes slum and blight, either downtown Fairfield or your downtown area as slum and blight. I mean, I think both towns that Fairfield and here, would like to have more active downtowns, would like to have a less high vacancy rate, would like to have greater utilization of the downtown buildings, would like to revitalize business. But I will try to study the market real carefully. I hope the labeling does not have any negative effect. The situation described with general rough situation in the economy and a number of foreclosures, short sales, is a tough one. I mean, I will study the market as carefully as I can and understand the sales as well as I can understand them, and use them as benchmarks for the valuation of all the properties in the town of Lisbon. When I talked about the sales ratio analysis as the tool to fine-tune appraisal schedules, generally we rely on the documentation that comes in through real estate transfer tax forms handled by Maine Revenue Services. When somebody registers a deed, they have to file a document and pay a real estate transfer tax and sign that this is the consideration that was paid for the property. And we exclude from the normal sales analysis sales that we know are not real arm's length sales that should be used as benchmarks. So we wouldn't use a sale from a father to a son or another close relative sale as a benchmark. We're not going to use some quick sales that occur in the settlement of an estate as a benchmark sale. There's sometimes an estate sale can be either way. Sometimes the estate is settled with a longer view in mind of how long to settle the estate, and it results in an arm's length sale. But sometimes it results in a very quick sale. Let's just get this over with. Sales in a foreclosure are generally not considered arm's length sales. They're considered distress sales. And very often, I mean, what happens often now, much more often than any of us would like to see, are foreclosures. And sometimes if there's enough foreclosures on a particular block or in a particular neighborhood, not good for anybody. I mean, you might live across from a house that for 6 months has never had the lawn mowed, never shoveled out, never taken care of, is vandalized. There's a strong market for copper pipe and copper wire. And banks sometimes don't manage the properties very well in the period of time that they're in the process of foreclosing and then take ownership. So that's a concern everywhere. But we will rely on the more mainstream arm's length transaction between a willing buyer and a willing seller, neither under any duress to complete a quick sale, and with adequate offering on the market.
Have you, in your previous towns that you've worked in, that have had the slum and blight designation to receive CDBG or qualify for CDBG grant funds, have you seen that negatively impact? I mean, you talk about your personal opinion, but have you seen it in numbers?
I can't say that I have. I did a revaluation in the mid-2000 period of time in Fairfield. It's the third time I did a revaluation in Fairfield. And the designation for that grant came after I had completed my work. So it's just incidental. It's just my observation that I read about the town designating that area that way. There's a little bit of debate among the councilors of should we do that or should we not do that. In the end, it was done. I haven't seen any remarkable changes in the area one way or the other, with one exception. There has been a major housing project conversion in downtown Fairfield, and I'm reasonably sure that would be in the area that was in that designation. It was a historic building, had been a hotel for a long, long time. Then it was converted to a furniture store for a long, long time. And they ran into some trouble. I think it probably was foreclosed on. And some investors purchased it, and it may have some low-income housing or historic tax credits that help the development go forward. But a very major construction project and conversion of that old multi-story structure to a housing project occurred after that designation was made.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions from the public? Mr. Warren?
Steve Warren from Lisbon. Most towns our size have a GIS package or system that allows the data on all the properties in town to be accessed by the public, and I'm wondering how this data will be accessible to the public there's a real benefit in terms of development and that sort of thing for being able to see what's available in a particular property, but also for equity and people knowing that their property has been fairly assessed.
Thank you. I think that corresponds with one of my last questions that I have for one of you guys. The cards that were presented tonight from Mr. Van Tynen from Chelsea for examples, how can the public access those? Will they be online, or can they only get those through an appointment? And I think that's kind of correlates with Mr. Warren's question, if somebody could just address that at the same time.
We'll certainly try to make summary information readily available. We can print lists by map and lot order, by alphabetical order, that can be available readily online as a searchable PDF file, and can be available in the office to look through as well. I know that the town has been trying to develop a GIS system, and I'm not quite up to date on exactly where you are, and I plan to meet with Dennis and try to view that GIS system and utilize it as much as I can in finalizing land values in particular. I have no idea whether that is something, the GIS system, that will be made available beyond an office computer. I don't know. It may be possible to make more than summary data available for internet access. I don't have that hosting ability myself, but if the town wants to pursue having some of this data available online, I think that can probably be arranged. And one way that it can be arranged is certain printouts can be perhaps developed by map and lot order and posted as large PDF files on your internet. I'd have to discuss that with somebody that's internet savvy with your particular system. That's the only way I think it would be feasible, is to do it map by map. I think that if you just try to do the whole town in one gigantic searchable file, it's going to exceed the ability of any computer I have to handle it.
Great, thank you. And I think that'd be beneficial for us to look at that when the time comes. Ms. Fitzgerald, real quick.
Could you explain what a GIS system is?
Well, that's not for tonight at this current moment. We're talking directly relating to the reevaluation. I mean, unless council wants to get into what a GIS system is, I mean, it can be pretty lengthy if you get involved. Do you guys want to get in that discussion now, or?
Just give people a definition so the public understands what we're talking about.
Can you give a brief technical definition of GIS?
Non-technical.
Or non-technical? Okay, a summary.
If
Reader's
it's going to come
Digest.
from me, it's going to be non-technical. GIS stands for Geographical Information System, and it's a way of utilizing the power of a computer to present layers of geographical information on a computer. So oftentimes one would have an aerial photograph as kind of a background. Another layer beyond that aerial photograph would be the property lines according to the tax map of the town. And other layers of information that you can selectively turn on and off to look at various features would be perhaps zoning, a very important thing to know, especially from a town point of view. Maybe wetland areas as they're designated by a state agency or the National Soil Conservation Service or something like that. Perhaps contours, so you can see whether the particular parcel is relatively flat or hilly. And some advanced users of a GIS system. I'm just a user. If there's one available, I'll look at it and try to gather information that's meaningful to me from that GIS system. But some advanced users of a GIS system can even create their own layer. So for example, a town may have certain soil types, especially in a floodplain, that are a high-value agricultural soil. And somebody could put a few characteristics together and create a layer that showed interval farmland in a town that might be important to be able to inventory.
Thank you. And I think, Kathy, we do have something that just came available.
We do have Google Earth. Jay Rate, when he updated our tax maps, he did all this work for us. It's on Google Earth. We still are kind of ferreting out some of the mistakes, and so we're not quite ready to release it. But once we've reviewed it thoroughly, we can post that to our website.
Yeah, I saw that one night when Dennis was presented to
Yeah.
the planning board, and it's very detailed.
It
A bunch of
is.
different categories you can layer up on.
Right.
And I think it'd be very beneficial for the town once it's available for us.
And Google Earth is free, so.
Yeah, great, thank
That's
you.
the best thing.
Are there any other questions? Mr. Warren?
I just want to follow up on that. The important thing here is that to
No,
go to
no,
most
not
of
right
the-
now, Mr. Warren.
No, I'm
We're
just
not
gonna say-
going to talk about GIS.
No, I just want to say that
Yeah,
the data
no,
that
Mr.
we're
Warren,
talking
we're all done. We're all done at this point. Are there any other questions not related to GIS regarding the reevaluation? Any other questions from council? All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
All right. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Order passed.
Workshop adjourned.
So you guys know, I emailed this to all of you.
I saw it.
You don't have to.
See how fast I can.
I must have been recently then.
Yes, momentarily.
Oh, I was gonna say, because I haven't seen that.
I don't like paper.
Yeah, I'm good.
I see
I've
that.
still got a stack at home. I'm waiting.